Have you ever felt like life took a turn you never saw coming? One moment, you're living the dream, and the next, you're standing in the middle of a life you don't even recognize. Today, we're diving into a story about love, loss, and the choices that change everything. This is a tale of second chances, unexpected connections, and the courage to face the unknown. Stay with me, because this one will make you rethink the paths we take and the risks we're willing to take for love. It's strange how life can turn out so different from what you imagined. You start with dreams, big and small, and you try your best to stay on the path. You tell yourself it'll all work out because you've done the right things. You picked the right man, the right life, the right choices. But then, somewhere along the way, things start to shift. Slowly, quietly, and before you know it, you're standing in the middle of a life you don't quite recognize. Let me tell you how it all started. His name was James. We met when I was 22, fresh out of college, and just starting my first job as a nurse at the local hospital in Austin, Texas. James was a mechanic at a garage not far from my apartment. I wasn't looking for love. I was focused on my new career, trying to prove myself in a tough world. But James, he had this warmth about him, like the world was a little softer wherever he was. He didn't try too hard or act like someone he wasn't. He was just James, and I fell for him. Those early days were like something out of a movie. He'd surprise me at work with lunch, always remembering my favorite sandwich, turkey on rye with extra pickles. I'd leave little notes in his toolbox, silly things like, "You make me smile," or "Don't work too hard." We couldn't keep our hands off each other. I'm not just talking about sex, though that was incredible too. It was the way he'd hold my hand when we walked, the way he'd brush my hair off my face when he kissed me. He made me feel seen. We got married a year later. The ceremony was small but perfect, just close friends and family at a park by the lake. I remember standing under that oak tree, looking into his eyes as we said our vows, feeling like I had hit the jackpot. This is it, I thought. This is my forever. For a while, it was everything I'd hoped for. We moved into a cozy little house, the kind with a front porch swing and just enough room for the kids we planned to have someday. James worked hard, putting in long hours at the garage while I worked the night shift at the hospital. We didn't have much, but we had each other, and that felt like more than enough. But life has a way of wearing you down, doesn't it? The long hours turned into even longer weeks. The bills piled up, and so did the stress. James started coming home tired, too tired to talk, too tired to hold me the way he used to. I told myself it was just a phase, that things would get better once we settled into a routine. And for a while, I believed it. But then, the cracks started to show. At first, it was little things. He stopped bringing me lunch at work. The notes I left in his toolbox went unnoticed. We'd go days without really talking, just passing each other like strangers in our own home. And then there was the bedroom. That's where the cracks turned into canyons. James used to be different, passionate, attentive. He made me feel like the most beautiful woman in the world. But over time, things changed. He'd come to bed late, exhausted. And when we did manage to make love, it was over almost as soon as it began. 2 minutes, sometimes less. I tried to be understanding. I told myself he was just stressed, that he'd find his way back to me eventually. But as weeks turned into months and months into years, I started to lose hope. I remember the first time I cried about it. It was a Tuesday night. James had fallen asleep on the couch again, and I was sitting in bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling more alone than I'd ever felt in my life. I wanted to shake him awake and scream, "Don't you see me? Don't you care?" But I didn't. I just turned off the light and cried myself to sleep. That's the thing about marriage. They don't tell you how lonely it can get. You're supposed to be a team, but what happens when one of you stops showing up for the game? What happens when the person who's supposed to be your everything becomes just another part of the background? I held on as long as I could. I told myself that love was about sacrifice, about sticking it out, even when it hurt. But deep down, I was starving for something more. For someone to look at me the way James used to. For someone to remind me that I was still alive, still desirable, still worth something. And that's when it happened. That's when I made the choice that would change everything. They say temptation comes softly, like a whisper in the wind. For me, it came in the form of a man named David. I met him at the hospital where I worked. He wasn't a doctor, and he wasn't a patient. He was one of the IT guys, there to fix some network issue in our department. I wouldn't have noticed him at all if he hadn't struck up a conversation while waiting for his system to reboot. "You look like you've had a long day," he said with a warm smile, his voice cutting through the hum of monitors and the soft beeping of machines. I laughed, more out of politeness than amusement. "Long shift," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. But David wasn't the type to give up easily. Over the next few weeks, he seemed to pop up everywhere: the cafeteria, the staff lounge, even the elevator. He had this way of making small talk feel effortless, like he genuinely cared about what you had to say. At first, I thought nothing of it. A little harmless flirting, I told myself. Nothing more. But it wasn't harmless. Not for me. It started with little things. David would bring me coffee during my breaks, always remembering how I liked it. Black with just a splash of cream. He'd ask about my day, listen to me vent about work, and somehow always manage to make me laugh, even when I didn't feel like smiling. He made me feel seen in a way I hadn't felt in years. And that scared me. I tried to pull back, to put some distance between us. I stopped sitting in the cafeteria during my breaks and started eating in my car instead. I avoided the staff lounge and took the stairs instead of the elevator. But no matter how hard I tried, David always found a way to slip past my defenses. The first time it happened, it was almost an accident. At least, that's what I told myself. We were both working late, and the hospital was quiet. The kind of quiet that feels almost eerie. I was sitting in the lounge, going over some paperwork, when David walked in. He didn't say anything at first, just grabbed a bottle of water from the fridge and sat down across from me. "You look tired," he said, his voice soft. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. For a while, we just sat there in silence. And then, out of nowhere, he reached across the table and took my hand in his. I should have pulled away. I should have said something, anything to stop what was happening. But I didn't. I just sat there, letting his warmth seep into me, feeling a void I hadn't even realized was there. "It doesn't have to mean anything," he said, as if reading my mind. "Sometimes people just need someone to lean on." But it did mean something. It meant everything.